I have major hot and cold spots in my house, and my wife is about to strangle me if I don't do something about it here pretty quick. In this previous video, we learned that the root cause of all this was the ductwork, and today we're going to be picking up where we left off. In this video, we're going to be making major modifications to the ductwork, take a look how that improved airflow, along with taking a look at some of our data log temperature reports to see if we made any headway. And the end result wasn't 100% what I was expecting. If you don't know me, I'm Kenneth with Atlas AC, and if you're interested in learning more about air conditioning and heating, we have free online buyer's guides, along with pricing on our website that you might be able to find helpful. And if you wouldn't mind, please like and subscribe. That would really help me out with the YouTube algorithms. Now that that's out of the way, let's get into it. We're going to be installing new ductwork. From there, we're going to run a couple tests and see what kind of improvements or issues it created. On the left of the screen is a video showing y'all some of my existing ductwork in the attic. On the right of the screen is the design of my current ductwork. These flex ducts here are our supply ducts. This one 18-inch is our return duct. These two ducts here are running in the chases, supplying the downstairs, and the rest of the ducts are supplying the upstairs. From the previous video, we know that these are the flex ducts that we need to upsize. However, I'm running into a problem with the supply plenum. We know that we have to push the ducts around 18 inches away from the air handler to make sure that everything pressurizes equally. That way one duct doesn't push more air than another one does. And I'm really needing a 4-foot supply plenum to make that happen. That way I have enough room to push the supply ducts far enough back. However, there's a roof line in the way, and right beside everything is framing. This is why they put the ducts so close to the air handler, because there's just nowhere else to put it. And I can't move the air handler anywhere else because there's no other good spot. So basically, since the attic is so small, I'm very limited on my options here. My idea to solve this is to build out a large trunk that attaches to each side of the supply plenum. One side's going to be 8 foot long and the other side's going to be 4 foot. And the reason why I have to make one side longer than the other is because the attic access is right here, and I need the ducts coming off of them on the other side of it. Any other design that I'm coming up with is simply going to require us to remove a lot of framing, and I'm not wanting to do that. That being said, this is the best design that I'm coming up with. Now I'm going to let the install department review the design and see if there's something that I'm missing. And unfortunately, they're not able to come up with anything better either. This is going to be a pain to get installed. However, this is what we all signed up for. So I guess it is what it is. Now that we got our design nailed down, what we're going to do is go to the house and get all of our measurements for the ductboard trunk and the distribution boxes. From there, we're going to come back to the shop and prefabricate everything for the next day. We're also going to double check all the materials that we're needing for the job and see if we're missing anything in our staging bay. The next day rolled around and now it's game day. Time to get loaded up and head out. We need to lay out some drop cloths. Then from there we can start demoing the ductwork. I apologize if the filming's not all that great. There's not a whole lot of room in the attic. Not to mention my sister was supposed to stop by and help film, and she never did. I asked her the next day what happened, and she said, "You never called me." Who do you think I am? Your mother too? But anyways, this is just gonna have to do. I was also working as a third man on the job, picking up trash and going and getting things that they needed from downstairs. And a third man is basically the helper's helper. So I'm really just a glorified golfer. This way the guys can work on more important things. Now that we got all the old ductwork out of the way, we now have some working room. Alright, let me give you all a quick rundown on the next steps. Now at the open space, we can put in the distribution boxes that we built the day before. From there, we're going to run our flex ductwork. Then where needed, we're going to put in new register boxes. Then we'll attach the flex ducts to the register boxes, along with putting in our supply or return grills. The next step after that, we're going to build out the ductboard trunk. We'll also build a platform under it for support. Then we're going to connect our flex ducts from the distro box to the ductboard trunk. Man, these guys sure do work fast. Now the guys are wrapping up attaching the zoning dampers to the trunk. Then we need to wire the dampers to the zoning control board. We don't want to forget about the Remy Halo, along with the fancy electrostatic filter. From there, all we have to do is commission the system. You're probably saying, hold your horses, Kenneth, nobody said anything about a zoning system. Well, I can always disable it at the thermostat like it wasn't even there. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. Now that we have everything up and running, let's do some before and after airflow test. What I'm doing now is go into each vent using this flow hood to get our CFM per vent. This is going to tell us what kind of airflow we're getting from the ductwork modifications that we made. Now to recap on the older ductwork, right here's the downstairs ducts, and in green we have one 10-inch feeding it, which is heating and cooling one half of the downstairs, and the grouping that I have in purple is also being fed by another 10-inch and is supplying the other half of the downstairs. And this section here is the upstairs ductwork. We have another 10-inch that is supplying the master bedrooms in yellow. We also have another 7-inch that's feeding these two ducts here, and the rest of the duct runs that are in blue are all connecting directly to the plenum. The upstairs and downstairs, whenever I combine the CFM, it is delivering around 1200 CFM, even though the system is pushing 1600 CFM. So I'm only getting 3 tons of airflow out of it on a 4-ton system. I'm going to do 2 CFM tests. The first test I'm going to have the system set in comfort mode. And comfort mode maxes out the system at 350 CFM per ton, or 1400 CFM of airflow. Then I'm going to do it again set to max cool, which is going to allow the system to push 400 CFM per ton, or in my case, 1600 CFM, which is going to give us a more apples to apples before and after comparison. And the reason why I'm wanting to test both modes is these systems already come set from the factory in comfort mode, and I want to show y'all what that looks like. And to get a true apples to apples comparison, I need to turn the system to max cool. Alright, let's take a look at our first airflow test at 1400 CFM. For the living room, we are coming up with 207 CFM. For the office area, 152 CFM. The dining, 77. To keep from boring you, I'm going to go ahead and quickly fill out the rest of this information, and then we'll review. Now let's see what we got. For the downstairs, we used to get 586 CFM coming out of the vents, and after the modifications, we're now looking at 621 CFM, which is only 35 more, so not a whole lot. You know what, let me go ahead and convert all this to tonnage so y'all might have a little bit better of a reference point. Hopefully this helps to simplify things just a little bit more. Alright, back to our old downstairs ductwork. You can see that we were getting 1.47 tons of airflow out of the downstairs vents. Now we're getting 1.55 tons of airflow. Overall, not all that big of an improvement. That's probably due to the system pushing 200 CFM less. And for the upstairs ductwork, it was able to push 1.55 tons of airflow, and now it's pushing 2 tons of airflow, which is a pretty decent increase in airflow. Overall, we went from 1200 CFM now to 1400 CFM. Now let's max out the system at 1600 CFM and see what that does. First things first, I need to make some adjustments to the thermostat, change some settings to max airflow, and that should push 1600 CFM, similar to the single stage Amana that we're comparing to. Now time to redo our CFM test. The total airflow that we're getting is 1598 CFM, almost exactly 1600 CFM. In the last test that we did, it was almost exactly 1400 CFM. Whenever I see things this close, I always think to myself, this person is full of crap because nothing is ever perfect. Now I might be splitting hairs here. There's a chance that I could have played with the AK factor a little bit more on the flow hood. It made it a tad bit more accurate, and that might have lowered the CFM readings just a smidge. However, the AK factor is really hard to get perfect. Now if I did that, it would have had a similar effect on the first 2 tests, and that's because the settings on the flow hood were the same for all 3 tests. The one thing that we do know that's 100% accurate is our delta is accurate. That means I added an additional ton of ductwork, and we're getting an additional ton of airflow. Now that that's out of the way, let's get back to our readings. There are a couple things here that I'm looking at that I find to be pretty interesting. The first being is it's kind of crazy how accurate this chart is that we use to design out our ductwork. The second being is the downstairs. It used to deliver 586 CFMs of airflow. Now we're looking at 700. By increasing the size of the ducts from a 10-inch to a 12-inch at the plenum, and tying that 12-inch duct back to the 10-inch before the chase, we were able to increase airflow fairly decently. Now let's pivot and look at the upstairs vent above the stairwell to see what it's doing. You can see that we used to have a 6-inch duct that was supplying 112 CFM. We changed that to a 9-inch duct that is now supplying 248 CFM. So we ended up more than doubling the airflow over the stairs. And that means a chunk of that is going to make its way downstairs. I'll show you a quick example of this. The kids found a couple dove feathers outside. I tied them to a string, and then for this one I taped it to the handrail just to capture what the air is doing. What's happening here is as the vent above the stairwell is pushing air, it's hitting this back wall. Then from there, it's pushing its way over the side of the stairwell. And since cooler air ends up being a little bit heavier than warmer air, it's then falling to the ground and spreading out downstairs. And the return air is being pulled right below the ceiling of the downstairs, making its way up to the 18-inch return upstairs. Now let's take a look at the upstairs master bedrooms. In both of these scenarios, we have a 10-inch duct supplying a distribution box, which is breaking out, feeding these 3 rooms. And we replaced the 8-inch duct in the master bedroom with the 9-inch duct, and we can see that the CFM went from 205 to 267, which is an additional 62 CFM. Now the problem that I'm seeing here are these 2 rooms here. If you notice, the master bathroom went from 46 CFM to 35 CFM. So there's actually less airflow in both of these rooms. And the reason for this is because the last system had undersized ductwork, and it created a lot more pressure throughout all the ductwork, and it was trying to push air wherever it could. Now that we have properly sized ductwork, what's happening here is there's not as much pressure throughout the ductwork, and the air is no longer trying to force its way out wherever it can. And that's what's causing this. An easy solution to solve this problem would be to use manual dampers to redirect airflow. I'm a really big fan of manual dampers because they're cheap, and it's a real easy solution to balance out airflow. If you ever end up making modifications to your ductwork, I'd always recommend making sure that manual dampers are included, for this one reason. Now let's jump over to our common area duct. We went from a 6-inch duct to a 7-inch, and went from 101 CFM to 163 CFM, a 62 CFM increase, which is a 38% increase in airflow. And we already talked about the other common area vent above the stairwell, so let's skip over that one. And the kids' bathroom is maintaining at 26 CFM. Now, if you recall, I was having some pretty big issues with my daughter's room, and on the kids' rooms, we went from a 5-inch duct to a 6-inch duct. Ooh, I don't like that number. Let's go ahead and change that. Fixed. That's actually 66 CFM in my daughter's room and 68 CFM in my son's room, but let's just go with these changes. So in my daughter's room, we went from 42 CFM to 67 CFM, which is a 37% increase in airflow. And my son's room went from 59 CFM to 67 CFM, a slight improvement of 12%. However, for my daughter's room, I don't think that's enough airflow to solve the problem. A 6-inch duct should easily be able to supply 75 CFM. And what's happening here is the same thing that's happening in the master bedrooms. How I would solve this problem, which you could also apply to the master bathroom, I would pull the duct from the distro box and attach it directly to the supply trunk. That would then allow the duct to be 100% utilized. Alright, I think we have a pretty good understanding of the supply air. Now let's shift gears and look at the return air. I added a 6-inch return in each of the kids' rooms and an 8-inch return in the master. And the way I ran the 8-inch in the master bedroom is kind of interesting. There's a duct box that's connecting the main 18-inch return, and what I'm doing is tying directly into that. And that's largely because there's no good way to get that run directly to the unit. We originally had 1400 CFM of return air, and for the new ductwork I can only factor in the 2 6-inch returns, because this 18-inch duct is only good for 1400 CFM. When we factor in the 2 6-inch returns, that increases the overall return air to 1550 CFM, pretty close to 1600 CFM. Now that we got our ductwork size correctly for the system, what does this mean for temperature control? Did we actually fix our hot and cold spots? Well, let's take a look. What we're looking at here is our temperature and humidity data log reports. The first two here is our example of the HVAC system performing on the old ductwork. On September 10th, 2025 is when we were still running our single stage 4-ton Amana system. Then we changed it out to a fully variable Infinity system. We left all the ductwork alone just to see if the equipment alone could help improve our situation, which we're looking at here on October 12th. Then on February 26th, what we're looking at here is after all the ductwork modifications. The orange line is representing temperature, and the green lines is representing humidity. All three of these days got up into the low 90s. Before we get started, I have to make a couple disclaimers. On the earlier data log reports before we changed out the ductwork, I had the temperature range set in between 90 and 60 degrees Fahrenheit and 70 and 40% humidity. On the newer readings, I had the temperature set in between 80 and 60 degree Fahrenheit and the humidity in between 60 and 40%. And what that's doing, it's making these graphs look like this. Now the temperatures are no longer aligned, and by crunching the graph down, now everything aligns correctly. So if you're wondering why the newer graphs looked a little bit different, that's the reason why. Another thing to note, I guess I forgot to turn on the downstairs data logger by the thermostat, so we don't have those readings, at least for this one day. Which isn't a big deal because it's by the thermostat, so we know it's going to be the most consistent. And the last issue that I'm dealing with, which is the biggest one, is the new data that we're looking at was done in February, and the house is not warmed up yet. And what that means is we don't have as big of a heat load, so the system is not going to run as much. Because you can see right here on this example how the system is running at nighttime. Now over here, we're not really seeing the system cycle on and off, and I'll get into the reason why we're not seeing that next. However, in the morning, we can see that the indoor temperatures are still coming down, and in this time frame, the system's not even running, but the temperatures are still coming down. And we can see an example of the system not running from my power meter. Here we have October the 12th, and over here we have February the 26th. And over here in October, you can see at midnight how the system continually cycles on and off all the way up until 12 p.m. Then it runs for a really long time from there. Then over here in February, we can see that the system didn't cycle all the way until around 9:30 a.m. And the cycle times are also a lot shorter. That's telling me that we have a lot smaller of a heat load on the house, even though the outdoor temperatures are very similar. In order to get the system to run to make some sort of comparison, I lowered the thermostat temperature to 70 degrees, 2 degrees lower than my previous test, just to get the system to run a little bit more. Because there's not much of a heat load, it's really interesting to see how this system is running. If we take a look at this graph right here, you can see the temperature swings going up and down by about 2 degrees. And the temperature swings are happening every time that the AC turns on. When we take a look at the other graph, we're not seeing that at all. And at first I thought there was something wrong with the data loggers. But I know that there's no way that 5 different data loggers would all be doing the same thing. So I know that they're working correctly. And then if we look over here, it's just a straight line. And the best I can tell, since the system knows it doesn't have a big heat load, it's just slightly pumping the gas and then letting back off. And that's why we're ending up with almost no temperature swings. So please note that this is not a true apples to apples comparison. I won't be able to get that information for a couple more months. However, there are some key indicators that we can take away from this. With all the groundwork laid, let's go ahead and take a look at our data loggers. For the data logger at the thermostat, I'm not going to spend too much time on it because there's really not all that much to see here. The temperature is set at 70 degrees and the data logger is showing that it's just staying at 70 degrees. Let's jump over to the upstairs common area. On the single stage system, you can see that temperatures were getting all the way up to around 77, 78 degrees. After replacing the equipment, you can see that we were able to maintain temperatures under 74 degrees. And after we replaced the ductwork, you can see that came down to around 72 degrees or 2 degrees above what the thermostat temperature was set at. Now let's take a look at my daughter's room. And this is the big problem area that I'm trying to solve. And we went from this to this to this. And this was kind of what I was expecting. We might have been able to achieve a small improvement. However, it's not going to be enough. This room is also going to require airflow balancing as well, because we're just not getting enough supply air. Now let's take a look at my son's room. And we went from this to this to this. Basically no improvement, which isn't a big deal because this room already manages really well. Before we jump into our summary and conclusion, I got a real big favor to ask of you. If you ever find yourself in our service area in Texas and you end up needing to replace your HVAC system or service it, that you give us the opportunity to earn your business. At the end of the day, that's really the only thing that makes this channel work, because I don't have any sponsors and we don't run any ads. And if you're not in our service area, you can still help too by liking and subscribing so this channel can reach more people. Now that that's out of the way, let's jump into our summary and conclusion. We were very limited with our options when it came to upsizing our ductwork. A tight attic, not able to get to the downstairs ductwork, which is very common for a lot of folks that have two-story homes. However, with all these challenges, we were still able to come up with a duct design using just simple math. We're needing to add an additional ton of airflow for the overall ductwork, and we were able to do just that. That being said, did we solve everything? No, but it got us 80 to 90% there. All that's left is some airflow balancing to redirect the air where it needs to go. And that should finally take care of all of our hot and cold spots. That being said, I'm wanting it to warm up a bit more before I do that, just to guarantee that I get it right. I'm going to leave that to a future video, balance out the airflow, fixing the hot and cold spots. Then I'm going to turn back on the zoning system. Compare the two to see if all you need is good ductwork or do we need a zoning system to kind of push things over the edge. And another thing that we really didn't cover in the video was the topic on the equipment itself. By increasing the overall size of the ductwork to where it needs to be for the equipment, it reduced the external static pressure to where it needs to be. Now the system's not going to be overworking when it's heating and cooling, resulting in fewer repairs and a longer life. Until next time, have a good one.